Miriam Nuno, Associate Professor in Biostatistics and Surgery Residence at the University of California at Davis. Her research focuses on the application of statistical methods for analyses of electronic health records and claims data. She joins us to present from the Barrios of LA to UC Davis, Latinas in STEM.
I'd like to thank Dr. Fred Brewer for the tremendous opportunity to present and to share my thoughts on this topic. It's also a great opportunity to come back to DIMACS. It's been nearly a decade and a half since I was here as a graduate student, so it is great to be back. So I have a sort of a bit of an overview of the topics that I hope to talk about. So first, I'll share some statistics of women in STEM. Some of these are already very common to you. Some of you might be very aware of these. I'll describe some thoughts about why we think we have women missing in STEM, describe some potential solutions, and then describe my path and research and how my STEM career has inflected everything that I do in terms of research, service, and teaching. So this graph shows you the distribution of women and men in 2014. Let me see if this pointer works. We have a pointer. Do we have a pointer? Is it this one here? Yes. Okay, it's kind of dying. So this is the data for 2004 and 2014 across the continuum for different areas of expertise. And we see that overall there's an overrepresentation of men over women. Some of the opportunities we see that are, as our previous speaker talked about, the areas of computer science and engineering. Over this 10-year period, we've seen a reduction in the representation of women. Thank you. For each of the areas, and the biggest decrease that we have seen is in computer science, where we had 23% to 18%. This seems a little better. If we look at the doctoral degrees by field and gender, this is data from 2016-2017, we see that for mathematics and computer science, there's 33 females for every 100 males, and for physical science and earth science is about 51.7. And engineering is also one of the areas where we're highly underrepresented. If we look not just the degrees, but also the jobs, because there is a transition of having a degree and actually getting a job. So if we look at the data for all jobs, women make about 47% of all jobs, but when you look at the STEM jobs, they make up 24%, so there's really a difference there. Now, we can also look at the college-educated workers within the STEM degrees by gender and field. So this is for men and for women. If we look at for men, we see that physical sciences and life sciences make out about 31%, engineering about 46%, math degrees about 5%, and computer science about 17%. When we look at the breakdown for women, we see that there's quite almost 60% of them in physical and life sciences degrees, 19% in engineering, and the really most striking data is for computer science, which I'm very glad to hear that there's a lot of people doing some work to try to improve these numbers. Now, what is the picture for Latina women in these areas? So this is a breakdown of the share in terms of in 2004, 2019, and 2014, and this is for women in these fields. And we see that the areas in which we're highly unrepresented is in mathematics and statistics, engineering, computer science, and it really hasn't changed dramatically in the last 10 years. Now, as we think about, why is there women missing in STEM fields and jobs, I sort of think about back to my own sort of experience, and I realized that, it really is a process that, one goes through, and each of those processes, there's a chance that you exit the system. as I've been able to, chat with some people here today, I've been sort of trying to pick people's brain and people that, do computer science, and I'm trying to figure out, what is it that, specifically for computer science, why do we see this big dropout? And just based on the information that I've been able to gather so far, very briefly, it seems that a lot of the thoughts that are shared is that, there's about 10 to 20% of women that are drop out of this computer science, even at the bachelor's level. So that seems to me like a really high dropout rate. And so, trying to understand, at which phase are we seeing, these changes, and, what kinds of changes can we implement to improve those dropouts. Now, when I think about why I think that there's a problem, I think about the different aspects that I feel that were challenging for me, and I feel that there's might be shared experiences for women in these different STEM careers. One of the pieces that I feel that are important is having, a hands-on experience very early on, having mentors and role models, generate excitement around the area of expertise. So I think a lot of my teaching of what I do now is, I clearly, teach statistics, but then I also try to, get students really engaged very early on and some kind of application problem where they see that, this data analysis and the painful process that you make them go through, he actually ends up, doing something to improve either someone's life, whether it be in surgery or in public health. Another one that I think is really interesting is, thinking about, having an encouraging a growth mindset. When I think back to my background, I think I was probably 15 where my parents never read to me. It was sort of back in the days, it was different. Now when we have my kids, I read to them every night, and I try to encourage them. But I think that maybe early on having this exposure to ideas of experimenting. So these are some faces that you might be aware of. This is Dr. Vasquez in our in UC Davis. She's a mathematician. She does a lot of work in topology for DNA. This is one of our, she's Sabrina. She's a mathematician and physicist, and I'm sure everybody knows about her, that, she built a plane when she was 13 or something like that, which is, and so I think this, picture here shows you that there are some really excellent examples. This is a girl from the border of Mexico. She was 12, and she was involved in, these innovative ways of teaching kids in her neighborhood when they didn't have education. And so I feel that there's, some specific things that we can think about to improve this. And so, just as I was going to give this talk, I have to confess that I had to do a little research about this topic, because I always realized what my challenges were, but I didn't realize how they translate to other women's challenges. And so by reading some of the literature, this is some of the information that I could gather. So, one of there was a couple of research papers that I read in detail, but one of them was, mentioning that women and men different how they link college majors to occupational transitions and post-baccalaureate training. So, it says that women are more likely to select biological sciences as a jump-off point for later careers outside of a narrowly defined STEM field. And so that could be one of the explanations why women may have a difficult time transitioning to the workforce in STEM careers. There's also, gender differences in life goals and the relative importance assigned to careers. So I know, at least when I grew up, one of the ideas was that if you were not very smart, then you should go get a job or get married. I know this is different now, which is really great. But I think back in the days, when I think about what made me different, so I was sort of, one of 6 kids, and why did I decide going into mathematics, it was primarily because I was an immigrant and I didn't know English, and mathematics was easy to me. It was as simple as that. So there's also some ideas clearly that there's employer discrimination, implicit bias in how we evaluate and we hinder initial job offers. So a lot of the times, just making that connection early on really changes your whole trajectory. And one thing that I have found as well is that the lack of support or influence of role models and mentors, at least for me, has been one of the major critical factors for being able to go through these phases successfully. So some solutions, clearly one is, increase the pool of women majoring in STEM fields. I think we're trying to do that, and we're seeing some hope in those directions. We also want to elevate the odds of transitioning into this first occupation, so it is not sufficient to complete a degree, but actually, transition to a successful job. and reduce the leaking pipeline. So there is actually some evidence that said that most career-oriented women who expect to marry late and limit fertility were no more likely to enter STEM fields than those women who anticipated marrying young and having 2 more children. So there is this group of women that we think initially put to the side everything, have kids, but they don't really turn out to take those jobs and STEM careers. So there are, as I was looking, there's just as you're teaching your students and as you're trying to motivate students, one of the things that I try to do is highlight, some exemplary Latinas that have, done very well in STEM. And this is definitely some of those women that I think, for me, give me a lot of motivation. And I think often my students may realize, they're like geeky little, persons that do jobs, and then they say, oh, this girl actually is really pretty, and she looks like a normal person. So I think all of it kind of makes it like connect in some way for them. And so just some, ideas about myself. So I was born in Mexico. I came to the U.S. when I was 15, and I'm one of 6 siblings. And when I came to the U.S., I had never been exposed to English or many education. But one of the things that I realized is, I hated all my classes except math, because all the classes I didn't really understand. I stood there in my class and I didn't understand half of the teachers what they were saying, but math was like the class that I did very well. When I think about my path has been quite windy, right? Now when I talk to my students and they're like, oh, I want to go here, I want to go to Harvard, I want to go here. Like, they have this straight path they think they want to follow, and then I think back, I never took that path. I really went everywhere. So I studied at community college, eventually went to graduate school in Claremont, then went to Harvard for, a Cornell PhD, Harvard postdoc and UCLA postdoc. So, when I talk to my students, I'm like, you can really take some deviations and you might end up, still, finding something that you really love to do. I think the most important learning lesson for me when I think about those key 5 things for me has been my mentors. This is Carlos Castillo Chavez, who was supposed to give this talk right now, and I was able to come and give his talk instead. And this is my parents when I graduated from Cornell, I suppose. And this is all my mentors that I've been able to acquire over the years during my times at Harvard, during, at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. And then, some of these faces, you realize who they are. But it really goes back to the very first teacher that I had, which was Miss Naclero in high school. And I remember she embarrassed me. She used to always call me to the front and say, she would tell everybody, like, why do you think Miriam gets such good grades in the homework? Do you guys think she has a genius, parent or something? And she was trying to give an example, but then it made me very embarrassed. And so since very early, she encouraged me to go this path. And so I'm very grateful to her and for every mentor that I've had. I wanted to spend a little bit of time and doing some sharing with you a research project that I recently did. This project is most interesting to me because it was a work that we did with an undergrad student. Since I've been at UC Davis, which has been over 3 years, I've tried to make myself available to students, underrepresented minorities, to do research and trying to make the connections and really push them towards graduate school. And this was one student that came to me for the summer and said, look, Dr. Nuno, I want to work on some research project, and he got this award under public health sciences to do a project. And so I said, sure, well, let's do something. And then I was like, what do you want to do? And then so I sat down and I said, this is what I do. I work, do statistical modeling, we'll do a lot of prediction, we do a lot of, machine learning. And I said, I mostly work in traumatic brain injury with kids. And so then he said, well, I kind of work on something that is kind of topic right now. And so we looked at so I think everyone is aware of the opioid epidemic of the United States. In 2015 has been the first year since the 1990s where we have seen a low reduction in life expectancy, and it's mainly due to deaths related to opioid use disorder. And so this student wanted to look at opioid use disorder in children that are born with this condition. And so the overview for this problem was, through prescription, looking at prescription rates, we have seen that they have fallen over the years, and we wanted to see what is the impact of opioid prescriptions in children that are born to mothers that are users. And so what we did is we looked at data across the whole United States, and we wanted to see the incidence of opioid use disorder in mothers as well as neonatal abstinence for children. And what we found is that, we knew that the opioid epidemic is an epidemic that primarily impacts white individuals, but what we found in this very massive data is that Native Americans and Alaska Indians, as well as white mothers and infants who were publicly insured or paid out-of-pocket care, really bear the highest burden in this data throughout the United States. And so I guess to make the story short, we ended up doing this summer project in about 4 weeks, and he recently presented his work a couple weeks ago at a conference. He got an award for it, and we're currently submitting our work to JAMA, and it's being reviewed. So, I feel really excited about this, and I'll share some of the findings. So just to give you an oversense of what is neonatal abstinence syndrome, so it's a drug withdrawal syndrome in newborn infants due to the abrupt cessation of utero exposure to opioids. There's symptoms that appear about 12 to 72 hours. The symptoms really vary within kids. Some kids have very poor a lot of symptoms. Some kids end up doing okay. The long-term impacts of NAS is really unknown. Most of the data is really just coming out, and there's no studies that have followed kids for a long time. And so we don't really know what the long-term impact is. When we look at the prevalence between 1999 and 2014, we see that there has been a 333 increase in the number of cases, so from 1.5 to about 6.6 cases per 100 delivery hospitalization. Now, needless to say that this is a really problematic issue in terms of cost. It really increases the cost of care by increasing length of stay and the care of complications. So this is the results that we found. The data that we looked at was from 2000 to 2016, and the numbers that we see in 2000 were about 3,980, and the number of cases that we found in 2016 were about 25,000 cases. Now, there's two sets of maps. The reason why we have two sets of maps is that we had state-level data all the way up to 2009, and after 2009, state-level data was no longer available to us. But one of the interesting aspects that you see as we look at the incidence by state is that there is really an aggregation of cases going to the Northeast. Now, we can also look at the data for the entire period by region. And we see a similar dynamic that most of the burden is buried in this area. Now we looked at also, this is NAS rates per 1,000 births, and this is the opioid use disorder in mothers. And so we see that there's a dramatic increase both in NAS and opioid use disorder from 2000 to 2016. Now, because we were interested in differences in these incidents and whether the different populations are impacted, we looked at sort of these two-way interactions. So this graph and this graph are in 2009, and this is in 2016. And so pretty much what we see is what is the change from 2009 to 2016 when you look at race and insurance. And so we see that in 2009, the people that were most impacted were people that were white and public insurance. As we move to the 2016, we see that this group is still quite impacted, but there's also quite a high impact in Native Americans and other groups. Now, we can also look not only at NAS incidence, but also opioid use disorder. And we see that from 2009 to 2016, white women, were highly impacted, but as we look at 2016, we see some really dramatic increases in these Native Americans that are, self-pay public insurance, and so this is sort of a critical opportunity for thinking about our prevention efforts. I will stop there. This is sort of just 2 slides of an entire paper that we did, but hopefully has encouraged, give you an idea of the kind of research that we do. Thank you.